It is 3:07 a.m. The air in the cramped, rented room outside Philadelphia is thick with the smell of stale cigarettes and a stagnant, heavy silence. You are sitting on a stained, threadbare mattress, the only object in the room. There are no sheets. You feel the rough, abrasive fabric of the mattress against your skin with every shift of your weight. Your phone lies on the floor, screen dark, a silent brick of plastic and glass. The battery is dead. You reach into your pocket and pull out the contents. $2.11. That is not the remainder of a paycheck. That is the entire sum of your existence. You listen to the walls. Through the thin, cracked drywall, you hear the rhythmic breathing of 3 strangers in the next room. They are asleep, entirely oblivious to the man sitting in the dark just inches away. You stare at the blank wall, waiting for the silence to break, but it only deepens. Your children are sleeping elsewhere tonight, in a house that once belonged to you, a life that was once yours. You can almost see the layout of those rooms, the way the light hit the kitchen floor at dawn, the sound of small footsteps on the stairs. That house is a ghost now, a place where your absence is a permanent fixture. 3 years ago, you were not this man. You were a person with a thriving career, a reliable car, and a wife who looked at you with recognition. You had a future that stretched out. Now, you are a ghost, hiding from debt collectors, praying your phone remains dead. You know that when it inevitably reawakens, the messages waiting there will surely obliterate the last vestiges of your life. The weight of it all is not just the poverty or the room. It is the crushing, undeniable fact that you, and only you, are responsible for this ruin. You built the trap, piece by piece. Every decision, every lie, every desperate gamble was yours. The strangers in the next room breathe in rhythm, unaware of the wall between you. You were 41 years old, a man whose life once epitomized stability. For 15 years, you were a mechanical engineer, the kind of person others instinctively trusted. You were a man who always had a plan, a man who lived by the precision of measurements and the reliability of logic. You meticulously designed machine components for a manufacturing company on the outskirts of Chicago. Your days were defined by the steady hum of the office, the clear objectives of your projects, and the predictable rhythm of a career that demanded absolute accuracy. You earned a salary of $110,000 a year. It was not wealth, perhaps, but it was undeniably stable. You owned a modest house, drove a reliable car, and shared your life with your wife and 2 children. From the outside, your existence appeared perfectly normal, and for a long time, it truly was. You were the person who solved problems, the one who ensured that every gear turned and every lever functioned as intended. You were the architect of your own security, building a life that felt as solid and unshakable as the steel you worked with every day. No one, not even you, could have predicted the seismic shift that was about to occur. You were born in 1982 inches Dayton, Ohio. Your father worked maintenance at a steel plant, his hands calloused from years of heavy labor. Your mother taught high school math, bringing home the steady, quiet discipline of numbers. Money was never abundant, but it was always predictable, a comforting rhythm in your childhood home. On Friday nights, your dad gathered with neighbors in the kitchen. Their laughter echoed against the walls as they played cards, the stakes a modest $5 or $10, purely for the camaraderie. You watched from the doorway, a silent observer, but the cards held no fascination for you. You were drawn to the machines. At 11, driven by an insatiable need to see how things functioned, you disassembled the family television set while your parents were out. You laid the components out on the carpet, a map of wires and glass. When your parents returned, they saw a broken machine and a pile of parts. They were convinced you had destroyed it. You did not argue. You simply knelt on the floor, picked up the soldering iron, and began to work. 2 hours later, you clicked the final casing into place. You pressed the power button. The screen flickered, hummed, and then displayed a clear, steady image. That technical gift became your compass. You enrolled at Ohio State, trading the quiet of your childhood home for the sterile hum of engineering labs. 5 years blurred into a cycle of late-night problem sets, endless coffee, and far too little sleep. You lived on cheap ramen. Your focus narrowed to the physics of stress, strain, and material integrity. You graduated with honors, a tangible reward for the relentless hours spent hunched over drafting tables. In 2005, you moved to Illinois, stepping into your first role as a junior design engineer. The work was demanding, but you thrived in the precision. You spent your days calculating load capacities and refining machine components, ensuring every piece met the highest standards of safety and efficiency. You climbed the ranks with deliberate intent, senior engineer, then lead engineer. Each promotion was earned through long hours and absolute focus. By 2014, your desk was a testament to your competence, your career a solid, reliable machine that you had mastered. Then, in 2014, the structure shifted. A coworker named Mike, a man known for his booming laugh, cornered you after a grueling week of design reviews. "Come on," he urged, his voice full of infectious enthusiasm. "A new casino just opened across the river. We are all going." You hesitated. How? Your mind was still replaying the schematics for a new conveyor component, and the idea of a casino felt entirely foreign to your orderly world. But the team was moving, and you followed. The air inside the building was thick, heavy with the scent of recycled oxygen and nervous energy. You found yourself standing at a roulette table, a blur of spinning colors and hushed, frantic anticipation. You looked at the green felt, then at the spinning wheel. Without thinking, you pulled a $50 bill from your wallet and placed it on red. The ball danced, clicked against the wood, and settled. Red. You watched as the dealer pushed a stack of chips toward you. You doubled your money. A sharp, unfamiliar thrill coursed through your chest, a sudden spike in your pulse. You doubled it again. By the time you walked out into the cool night air, you had $1,200 in your pocket. You looked at the glittering Chicago skyline, and one thought anchored itself in your mind. That was fun. 3 months passed. The memory of the casino floor began to blur, receding into the background of your daily routine. You returned to your desk, your spreadsheets, and the quiet rhythm of your life in Illinois. You did not return to the river. You did not think about the wheel. Then, Mike approached your desk again, his grin as wide as it had been before. The invitation was the same, and this time, you accepted without the previous hesitation. You walked into the same room, sat at the same table, and watched the same wheel spin. But the outcome was different. You placed your bets, watched the ball settle, and felt the familiar weight of a loss. Then, another, and another. By the time you stood up to leave, $900 had vanished into the house. The drive home was silent. You stared at the road, the ache of the loss pressing, sharp and immediate. But then, the internal machinery of your mind began to work. You whispered, "It is just the cost of entertainment." In 2015, the casino across the river shuttered its doors, a physical monument to chance that simply ceased to exist. You assumed the chapter was closed, a brief, expensive experiment that had run its course. But 2 weeks later, a new, more insidious world opened. You discovered online gambling. It was not a destination you had to travel to. It was a presence you carried in your pocket. The physical world had provided a necessary friction. The drive, the walk across the floor, the act of pulling cash from a wallet. Each of those steps was a tiny, vital window for your brain to pause, to reconsider, to stop. Online, that friction vanished. You were lying on your couch, the room dark, the soft, artificial glow of your phone illuminating your face. 3 taps. That was all it took. 3 taps to initiate the game, to place the bet, to watch the numbers flicker and change. There was no commute, no crowd, no dealer to look in the eye. Just you, the screen, and the infinite, silent speed of the digital ether. You realized then that the barrier between your bank account and the void had been erased. At first, you maintained a rigid semblance of control. You viewed the app as a minor, controlled indulgence, a weekly subscription to excitement that cost exactly $100. It was a sum you could justify, a rounding error in your monthly budget. Sometimes you won, a fleeting, electric pulse of triumph that validated your choice. Mostly, you lost, the small defeats accumulating in the background like slow-growing rust on a machine component. You did not track the total. You did not look at the monthly statements. You simply tapped the screen, watched the digital numbers flicker, and moved on. But 6 months into this new habit, the math became impossible to ignore. You sat at your desk, the glow of your monitor reflecting the spreadsheet you were supposed to be working on, and calculated the damage. $3,000. The number stared back at you, cold and precise. It was not yet a catastrophe, but it was a weight. A subtle, persistent undercurrent of anxiety began to hum beneath your daily life. You found yourself checking the app in the elevator, in the grocery store line, and in the quiet moments before sleep. The loss was no longer just money. It was a growing, invisible debt that demanded your constant, nervous attention. Then came that Friday in October. You lost $2,500 in a single frantic blur. It was a sum that shattered your self-imposed limits, a breach of the internal contract you had built. A siren song echoed in your mind. I can win it back. You spent Saturday morning chasing the ghost of that money, tapping the screen with white-knuckled intensity. By Saturday night, you were down another $8,000. You sat in the bathroom, the cold tile pressing against your back, staring at the screen. $10,500. An entire month of your salary vanished into the digital ether in 48 hours. You stood up, splashed water on your face, and walked out. Laura was in the hallway, sensing the tremor in your hands, the hollow look in your eyes. She asked what was wrong. You looked at her, the silence stretching between you, and you spoke, just tired. It was the first time you had ever looked her in the eye and built a wall of deception. The following week, the silence in your house felt like an accusation. You were trapped in a vortex of debt and delusion, your mind racing to find a way to plug the hole in your finances. You called your brother. You told him the plumbing in your house had burst, a catastrophic failure requiring immediate, expensive repairs. He was trusting, generous, and fast. He sent $7,000 to your account within the hour. You did not call a plumber. You did not buy a single pipe or valve. You deposited the money directly into the gambling app, a desperate, irrational attempt to chase your losses and erase the evidence of your failure. You watched the balance rise, then fall, then vanish entirely. 3 days. That was all it took for his money to disappear into the digital ether. You stared at the zero balance, and for the first time, you felt a strange, chilling sensation. It was not regret. It was the realization that you had crossed a line. By 2016, your existence had splintered into 3 distinct, carefully guarded realities. At the office, you remained the respected engineer. You delivered projects on time, maintained the complex schematics, and held the trust of your team. You were a pillar of technical competence. At home, you were the devoted father. You drove to baseball practice, sat in the stands, and performed the rituals of a normal, stable life. But there was a third realm, a shadow world where you truly resided. It was a life lived in the margins of the other two. You became an expert at finding pockets of privacy. In the bathroom at midnight, the only light came from the screen. In your car before work, you stole minutes to place a wager. In elevators, you checked the odds while the doors were still sliding shut. You were constantly calculating, constantly shifting, and constantly hiding. You were a ghost in your own home, a stranger in your own office, and a prisoner to the glowing device in your hand. The secret world had stopped being a distraction. It had become the only place where you felt alive. By the end of 2016, the numbers had ceased to be currency. They were now markers of a total collapse. Your losses hit $95,000. This was not just a debt. It was a structural failure of your entire existence. You stopped being a gambler in the traditional sense and became a master of a shadow accounting system. You kept a hidden ledger, not for your employer, but for the intricate web of your own deception. You juggled credit card balances, shifted personal loans, and mapped out payment cycles with the same technical precision you once used for machine components. Every morning began with a calculation. Which debt was most urgent, which lie was most plausible, and which creditor could be stalled for another 48 hours. You were no longer designing systems for a manufacturing company. You were designing a system to keep your life from imploding. You lived in a state of constant, high-stakes arithmetic. Every interaction was a transaction of trust, and every conversation was a test of your ability to maintain the facade. You were running a full-scale operation, a complex, fragile machine built entirely out of falsehoods, and you were the only one holding the blueprints. In January 2017, the cycle of debt hit a wall. Then, the impossible happened. You placed a series of sports bets, a frantic, last-ditch effort to stop the bleeding. Every pick hit, every underdog won, every variable aligned in your favor. Your account balance suddenly surged to $41,000. You stared at the screen, the numbers glowing in the dark, and for the first time in years, the pressure in your chest eased. This was not just money. It felt like a divine intervention. You immediately moved funds to clear the most aggressive creditors, a temporary reprieve from the relentless pursuit. You felt the weight of the last 2 years lift, if only for a moment. But as you watched the balance update, a new, more dangerous thought took root. You convinced yourself that this was not luck. You believed you had developed a strategy, a newfound technical understanding. You were not winning. You were simply falling deeper into the trap. You took your family out to a restaurant that night. The menu was expensive, the wine was vintage, and the smiles on your children's faces were the first genuine ones you had seen in months. You handed Laura $5,000 in cash, claiming it was a performance bonus from your engineering firm. She looked at the money, then at you, and the relief in her eyes felt like a physical weight lifting from the table. You watched them eat, feeling like a provider again, a man who had finally solved the equation of his own ruin. But inside your head, the real work was just beginning. You spent the meal analyzing the sports data that had led to the win. You broke down the variables, the timing of the bets, and the odds, constructing a complex, internal theory of success. You convinced yourself that randomness was a system you could control. You saw patterns in the noise. You mapped out future bets with the same intensity you once applied to machine components. Every bite of food was a calculation. Every laugh was a distraction from the mental architecture you were building. You were not just lying to your wife. You were systematically dismantling your own ability to perceive reality. 6 months. That was all it took for the $41,000 to evaporate. It did not vanish in one catastrophic event, but in a series of calculated, increasingly desperate wagers. You watched the balance tick down, then hit zero, then dip into the negative. You chased the losses, convinced the next algorithm would correct the trajectory. It did not. You liquidated savings, maxed out credit lines, and borrowed against the future, losing another $60,000 in the process. The total debt climbed past $150,000. The math was no longer a game. It was a cage. Then, the silence of your home was broken by the first of many calls. A creditor, then a bank, then a collection agency. The phone became a source of constant, jagged noise. You stopped answering, letting the calls go to voicemail, watching the notification count rise. Each message was a physical reminder of the hole you had dug. You sat in your office, the glow of your monitor, masking the reality of your bank statements, while the outside world began to close in. The walls of your life were shrinking, and the relentless, rhythmic ringing of the phone was the sound of the trap finally locking shut. The notification arrived on a Tuesday evening, a sharp, digital chime that cut through the silence of the living room. It was a bank alert, pushed directly to the shared family phone plan. You saw it first, the red icon indicating a missed payment and an overdraft notice. Your heart hammered against your ribs, a frantic, irregular rhythm. Before you could swipe it away, Laura reached for the device. She opened the message. The silence that followed was heavier than any sound. She read the numbers, the stark, undeniable evidence of the debt you had hidden for years. She did not scream. She simply set the phone down and looked at you, her eyes searching for a lie you no longer had the strength to fabricate. The next 3 days became a blur of relentless, agonizing interrogation. Every meal was interrupted by the same questions. Every night was spent in the same room, dissecting the wreckage of your finances. You tried to deflect, to offer excuses, but the facts were etched in the bank statements. The arguments were circular, exhausting, and brutal. You paced the floor, she sat at the table, and the distance between you grew with every word. The arguments finally stopped because you ran out of lies. You sat on the edge of the sofa, the silence of the house pressing against your ears. You began to speak, and for 40 minutes, you did not stop. You laid it all out. The initial bets, the stolen money, the fake plumbing repairs, the secret accounts, and the total, staggering debt. You watched her face as the narrative unfolded. The confusion vanished, replaced by a hollow, distant stillness. She did not interrupt. She did not weep. She simply absorbed the magnitude of the ruin, each word a stone added to the wall between you. When you finally fell silent, the room felt vacuum-sealed. You waited for the anger, for the shouting, for the release of the tension that had defined the last 3 days. It never came. Instead, she stood up with a slow, deliberate movement. She looked at you, not with hatred, but with a terrifying, absolute clarity. The resolve in her eyes was not a choice, it was a conclusion. She turned away, her footsteps measured and quiet as she walked toward the bedroom. The door closed with a soft, final click. In that moment, the world you had built over 15 years simply ceased to exist. You were left alone in the quiet. The sound of movement upstairs was rhythmic, efficient, and final. Drawers opened and closed. The heavy thud of suitcases hitting the floor echoed through the hallway. You remained on the sofa, paralyzed by the weight of the silence. Then, the front door opened. You heard the voices of your children, small and confused, followed by the firm, measured cadence of Laura's footsteps. The door closed. The lock turned. The house went still, stripped of its life and its purpose. You sat in the dark for a long time, listening to the hum of the refrigerator, the only sound left in the space you once called home. Then, your phone buzzed on the coffee table. A notification from the app, a promotion, a free bet. The screen lit up the room, a sharp, blue glow against the shadows. You reached for it, your fingers moving with a muscle memory that bypassed your grief entirely. You opened the interface. The numbers flickered, the familiar, hypnotic sequence of colors spinning on the glass. You placed a bet. The silence in the house became a permanent fixture. You stopped going to work, or rather, the company stopped waiting for you to arrive. A brief, sterile meeting in a glass-walled office ended your 15-year career with a single signature on a termination form. You walked out of the building, your access badge deactivated, the weight of the company laptop gone from your bag. The professional identity you had meticulously constructed for over a decade evaporated in a single afternoon. You returned to the house, but it no longer felt like yours. The mail piled up in the entryway, thick envelopes with official seals. Then came the day the locks changed. You arrived to find a notice taped to the front door, a cold, legal document declaring the property in foreclosure. You stood on the sidewalk, watching as a crew arrived to clear the interior. They moved with mechanical efficiency, tossing the remnants of your life into plastic bins. You turned away, the keys in your pocket now useless pieces of metal. The tangible world you had built was gone, leaving you with nothing but the device in your hand. You walked until your feet burned, the city streets a blur of indifference. Your car was the last piece of your old life to vanish. You returned to the parking lot where you had left it, only to find an empty space and a jagged piece of glass on the asphalt. The bank had come for it too. With the vehicle gone, your mobility ended and you were tethered to the city by nothing but the mounting invisible chains of your debt. The total had surged past $500,000, a figure so large it ceased to be money and became a physical weight. The interest was a monstrous, living thing, devouring every scrap of income before you could even touch it. It grew while you slept, it grew while you walked, and it grew while you sat in the cold. Every attempt to calculate a path out of the hole resulted in the same impossible math. You were no longer a man with a career or a home. You were a ledger entry, a collection of liabilities that had outpaced your ability to exist. The debt was a predator that never tired, never blinked, and never stopped hunting. You were trapped in a cycle where the cost of your past was consuming your future. By 2021, the world had shrunk to the dimensions of a rented room outside Philadelphia. It was 3 a.m., and the air held the scent of stale smoke and old dust. You sat on a mattress that lacked sheets, the fabric rough against your skin. Through the thin drywall, the rhythmic breathing of strangers pulsed in the dark, a sound that underscored your isolation. Your phone lay on the floor, a dead, black mirror. You looked at the device, then at the empty space around you, and a strange, serene clarity settled over your thoughts. People often spoke of hitting rock bottom as a cataclysmic cinematic event. They expected a crash, a scream, a final, violent fracture. But as you sat in the silence, you realized the truth was far more precise. Rock bottom was not a loud explosion. It was quiet. It was empty. It was purely mathematical. You stared at the wall, calculating the sum of your existence, the debt, the loss, and the absence of any remaining leverage. The realization arrived without fanfare. This could not continue. The equation of your life had reached a 0 point where the only remaining variable was the decision to stop. The sun rose, but it brought no warmth to the room. You stood, your body feeling heavy, and stepped out into the biting air of a Monday morning. The city was already moving, people rushing toward jobs and lives that you had long ago surrendered. You walked. Every block felt like a mile, your legs heavy, your mind repeating the same, singular objective. You reached the clinic, a building of sterile glass and brick that looked entirely indifferent to your presence. The door swung open with a hiss of pressurized air. Inside, the smell of antiseptic replaced the stale scent of your room. You moved toward the reception desk, your heart hammering against your ribs, a rhythm that felt louder than the ambient noise of the waiting room. The receptionist looked up, her expression neutral, waiting for a request you had never voiced in all your years of ruin. You gripped the edge of the counter, your knuckles white, and forced the words out. It was a physical labor, as if you were lifting a weight that had pinned you for a decade. You looked her in the eye and said, "I have a gambling addiction. I need help." The receptionist looked over her glasses, her expression flat. "The addiction counselor comes in on Wednesdays," she said. It was Monday. You looked at the door, then at the empty hallway. Leaving meant returning to that room, to the silence, to the temptation of the void. You didn't move. You found a chair in the corner, a molded plastic seat with a hard, unforgiving surface. You sat. The clinic was a place of transit, people coming and going with ailments that had names and cures. You were a ghost in their periphery. You stayed through the afternoon, watching the shadows stretch across the linoleum floor. You stayed as the lights dimmed, the building settling into a quiet, humming stillness. You didn't eat, you didn't sleep. You simply waited, your hands folded in your lap, your mind tethered to the singular promise that help was coming. Tuesday arrived, with the same sterile light and the same indifference. When the office door finally opened on Wednesday morning, you stood up, your body protesting every movement, and walked toward the light. The counselor was not a miracle worker. but a mirror. You sat in a circle of folding chairs, the floorboards creaking under the weight of shared ugly truths. You spoke until your throat was raw, detailing the debts, the lies, and the hollow core of your former life. It was the first time you had ever truly been heard. Then came the courts. You stood before a judge, a man who saw only numbers and failures, and signed the papers that erased your past. Bankruptcy was a cold, clinical death of your previous identity, a total liquidation of the life you had built. You walked out of that courthouse with nothing. No assets, no credit, no reputation. You started the next morning in a cramped, rented room, working a job that required none of your engineering expertise. You spent your evenings in dimly lit community centers, listening to others recount their own falls. The process was slow, a grinding, daily discipline. You tracked your expenses in a notebook, counting every cent, refusing to let the old patterns take root. You rebuilt your life brick by painful brick, not with grand gestures, but with the quiet, steady accumulation of honest days. It was a long, exhausting climb. The silence in your small room was no longer heavy. It was simply empty. You were no longer running from the past, but you were not yet standing firmly in the future. Then, your phone buzzed a sharp, sudden vibration against the wooden table. You looked at the screen, a name you hadn't seen in years, your daughter. You stared at the text, your thumb hovering over the glass, heart hammering against your ribs. It was brief. 3 words, a question about your day. You typed a response, then deleted it. You typed another, then deleted that too. Every word felt like a structural load you were afraid to place on a foundation that had not yet set. You realized then that trust is not a switch you flip. It is a bridge built one plank at a time, and the pace is not yours to set. You sent a simple, honest reply. You set the phone down and waited. Minutes stretched into an hour. When the screen finally lit up again with her response, you didn't rush to read it. You took a breath, feeling the weight of the moment. It was not a grand reconciliation, but it was a beginning. The bridge was holding, however thin, however fragile, and that was enough for today. The apartment is small, barely enough room to pace, but it is yours. You have reclaimed the space, organizing your life with the same precision you once applied to machine components. There is a desk in the corner, clear of clutter, where you now work as an engineer again. The hum of your computer is steady, a rhythmic sound that signifies productivity rather than the frantic, high-stakes noise of the past. You spend your mornings drafting schematics, your mind sharp and disciplined, finding satisfaction in the logic of gears and levers. Every object in this room has a place, and every action you take is intentional. You have built a sanctuary out of necessity, a place where the air is clear and the variables are predictable. You look at your hands, steady as they operate the mouse, and recognize the same technical mind that once disassembled a television set as a boy. It is not the life you had before, but it is a life of your own design. You keep a tally, not because you are proud, but because you are vigilant. 842 days, that is the count. 842 mornings where you woke up without the immediate, suffocating need to check a screen or chase a loss. The urge is not dead. It is merely dormant, a low-frequency hum that occasionally vibrates in the back of your skull. When the stress of a project mounts, you recognize it now for what it is, a chemical ghost. You do not fight it with willpower alone. You fight it with the cold, hard logic of an engineer. You know the mechanics of the trap. You know that the game is designed to strip away every layer of friction until only the impulse remains. You have seen the bottom, and you have seen the math of the ruin. The most dangerous aspect of the addiction was never the loss itself, but the delusion that you could control the variables. You understand now that the true danger of the game is only revealed when the final bill arrives, a sum so vast it exceeds the value of everything you have ever built. You are no longer playing. You are no longer betting. You are simply living, one day at a time, calculating the cost of your freedom and finding it, finally, to be worth the price.